2023 economic recession that we're seeing in Venezuela is going to be as the 2010's depression that we saw in the country. Today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
On the first 2 quarters of 2023, we've seen a 7% GDP contraction, and hence, technically, a recession that we're having in Venezuela after a couple of years of double-digit GDP growth. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to leave what we saw on the 2010's depression that we had in Venezuela, an 80% GDP collapse, and the summit, or I should say the bottom of the situation was on 2017. Well, let's discuss first how is the sentiment on each situation. So let's discuss what happened in 2010's. Well, first, the decade started with a very high worldwide price of crude oil. And of course, at the moment, Venezuela produced over 2 million barrels of crude oil per day. Now, at the moment, the still living President Hugo Chavez had these socialist, Marxist, communist policies back then that were destroying the private sector little by little, well, not so little. So opportunities overall in the country were very scarce. However, you can see the Venezuelans had a relatively good standard of living back then. They reached a point on 2013, at the moment, President Hugo Chavez passed away and Nicolás Maduro took over the helm. Maduro kept the terrible economic policies until 2018. But what happened is the oil industry was decimated, was destroyed just on that period between the early 2010s to the late 2010s. So what ends up happening is that the oil production started to decline, but also oil prices worldwide declined sharply as well, from over 200 barrels of crude oil to, at some point, $20 per barrel. And of course, that impacted the fiscal revenue of the government, but also at the moment, the private sector was destroyed as well because of these draconian economic policies. So what ended up happening is on 2017, it was awful, probably the worst year of being a Venezuelan. At the moment, the public services were completely deteriorated. Also, a lot of scarcity regarding basic goods and services. So you have to go in lines, like the typical socialist movie. It was hard to find products. And when you do find some products, usually it was on a premium market price. The sentiment overall was very negative, and actually that was one of the years when you see a spike of the migration of the country. Venezuelans just fled the country on that year, and the sentiment was very pessimistic. Actually, we had a bunch of anti-government protests over there that actually threatened a little bit in order to overthrow the Chavismo to power. That, of course, didn't happen. Many people died, they got injured, they got captured by local authorities. So it was probably the worst year, at least of my life, that I've seen on the country. So the situation apparently reached a bottom on 2018, but still the sentiment was, very pessimistic amongst Venezuelans, and most of the businessmen, small business owners, the entrepreneurs in Venezuela, actually it was awful as well. Now, the same negative and pessimistic sentiment is something that I'm seeing every day in Venezuela at the moment on 2023. The funny thing is that on 2023, the sentiment was actually positive at the start of the year, but many things had happened. Prices are increasing. I'm talking the real inflation in dollars, not the nominal inflation that you see on bolivars, because nobody cares. Remember, the country is de facto dollarized, and the dollarization started actually on 2018, and that actually did a lot of good in order to replenish the stocks and the shelves on any different businesses, so created a positive sentiment back then on late 2018 and throughout the mid-2019. However, people are not taking it with a grain of salt. Many people are saying that we are going back towards the 2017 years, and it's going to be 2023, it's going to be the same. However, it's not. It's very different. The sentiment might be the same. However, the situation is quite the opposite. Back then, what we had was a lack of goods and services. And what we have right now on 2023 is actually, you see, any product from all over the world. You can buy scotch, you can buy Spanish ham, you can buy American products that you see on Walmart and Costco, places like that. You can see the new iPhone, you can see even new cars, of course, very expensive, overpriced new cars, but still you can see them. So you have a supply of goods and services today on 2023 that you didn't saw by any chance on 2017. The situation right now is this consumer depression. People are not earning the sufficient income, the discretionary income, in order to consume and actually have decent standards of living. And actually, one of the things that I'm seeing right now amongst the popular sentiment is that many people started to migrate again, something that stalled a little bit on 2022. So many people, not as much as on 2017. On 2023, you see a lot of people that are actually planning to leave the country. Unlike that case where many people were migrating to Colombia, Chile, and also Peru. Actually, Peru was a very popular destination, Argentina. Right now, what I'm seeing of the migrant is that either they migrate to the United States, to Spain, or that's it, or bust. They don't want to go to any place in Latin America. Because now that we have a bunch of migrants abroad, we see that the situation in Chile, in Peru, in Mexico, in Panama, in Colombia, that right now have a left-leaning president, situation is terrible. It's just as bad, not as bad as Venezuela, but almost the spread is not that high. So people say, you know what, if I'm going to migrate, I'm going to migrate to a good country. And on the perception of the average Venezuelan, United States and Spain, imagine that, or some other countries in Western Europe it's better to migrate to their first world countries. And if you're watching this video and you're subscribed to this channel for a while, you know that's not the case. But of course, they have varying standards that we have in Venezuela, but still the life is not that good. There's not like they have a lot of opportunities for migrants. Very good. Now, people are migrating. This is the tricky thing about the migrating to the United States from Venezuela. There is a legal mechanism that you can migrate legally to the United States, but it's just for a handful of Venezuelans. In most cases, they are migrating, going to the Darien Gap on Panama. In case you don't know, the Darien Gap is this very dangerous jungle that you have between Colombia and Panama. So in order to migrate to the United States without a visa, and also many of the Central American countries are requiring Venezuelans in order to ask for a visa. And of course, most Venezuelans cannot afford to get a visa because it's very hard to get. So what they're doing is risking their life going through Colombia in order to pass the Darien Gap, and after that going to Panama, Costa Rica, other Central American nations, in order to reach Mexico and migrate to the United States via the Mexican border of the United States. Now, here is a funny thing, it's a funny caveat, just an anecdote. I was speaking to a very good close friend that actually is very young. He's a decade younger than me, so he's more, on the going with girls and so on, so younger crowd. So I'm speaking to him, and he's telling me that unlike that situation in 2017, that most people wanted to migrate, both males and females. Right now, females, especially the pretty ones, they don't want to migrate, and here's why. Because the trend amongst the early 20 crowd, especially of course on females, is that they don't care about migrating or not, because they are doing an activity related to the oldest profession. They're doing sex work in any shape or form. Could be being an escort, being a straight up prostitute, but also being a content creator, a Instagram model, an OnlyFans content creator, or just a sugar baby, so being supported by elder men with some money. So most females are not migrating. The males are the ones that are migrating, the young kids, the early 20s crowd that they don't have opportunities. They have scarce opportunities within the country. So what they're doing is flat out migrating because the situation is bad. And also the society for them is bad because there are young men with no opportunities or scarce opportunities in life in order to increase, their value, their financial situation, and they are migrating. But the females are not migrating, my friends. And something that I'm sharing as an insider story, if you like. Now, I'm going to explain the main difference between the 2010's depression, especially 2017, and the 2023 recession. Well, first, I have to say that even the sentiment among the small and mid-sized business owners and entrepreneurs is actually positive for the long run. Still, according to some economists that I trust a lot, we are still expected to grow on this year, 2023, slightly positively regarding GDP, and a worst case scenario, slightly decrease regarding GDP, of course. Now, the main difference is back then is the 2017 was the real year when, and I'm gonna use this euphemism, shit got real in Venezuela. All the bad decisions made by the government back then during a decade and a half, we see the results, the bad results of the socialism and communism and so on. So what ends up happening right now, unlike 2017, is that actually the government is taking some measures. We went from communism and Marxism. Right now we have something like a chronic capitalistic society. So still capitalistic, by the way, but it's a chronic capitalism with a lot of bureaucracy. But it's better than the Marxism that we had in 2017. The issue is that when you are doing a 180 regarding the economic model, and that's something that I'm seeing on the Venezuelan government, for better or for worse, is that, of course, you have to apply draconian measures in order to correct the draconian measures that you had before regarding communism and so on. So we need to take this pain. Things are getting expensive because there is no subsidies, there is a lot of bureaucracy, there is a lot of frictions, and in order to have a supply of goods and services, of course, they need to be expensive because right now there is not scale, there is a low scale in Venezuela in order to access to those services. Unlike the United States, you have 300 million people, and most people with a credit card can pay for an iPhone or a fancy dinner or a Nike shoes or something like that. In Venezuela, we don't have neither credit and we don't have scale. So just a handful of people can afford actually the Nike shoes or the iPhone or something like that. And less people consuming, of course, the unitary price is going to be higher. And also the Venezuelan economy and the businesses, the private businesses, are shifting towards this model. That should be the regular model, but it wasn't the case less than a decade ago. So we're going to see some pain. I'm talking for the average Venezuelan a few years until some things can improve, hopefully. And of course, we have to also expect that the oil production is going to increase slightly, at the very least, on the next 5 years, and that's going to improve a little bit the economy, but we have to still wait. I'm not saying jump the ship and leave the country because this is as best as it's going to get, because it's not the case. But I'm not saying that on the next 5 to 10 years it's going to be a panacea. It's just an strange situation that can last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe more, and we can see something great on the next 10 years, or at the very least, improve the standard of living on the next few years. But we are far from that. I mean, it's not like Venezuela is going to become Switzerland or the Singapore or Norway or something like that, because I don't see that happening. Or we can have something special, something different, something better. And I believe me, I actually honestly think it's going to be better. I'm not saying it's going to be excellent, but it's going to be better than we have on 2023. And I can guarantee you that 2023 is way better than 2017. Lastly, and I'm going to close the video with this, is regarding the sentiment of the Venezuelans, because Venezuelans have still kind of a populist socialist mindset. I mean, it's not like they like socialist politicians, they learned the lesson. However, they still think that the government should, at some degree, take care of them. And we had great standards of living on the 50s, 70s, and 80s, and on a lesser degree on the early 2000s. So they think the country is going to improve. It's just when we have, again, this government aid that is going to help Venezuelans travel the world again and have scotch and buying it like it's just water and free gas and cheap food and cheap services and stuff like that. And that is not going to happen. And that's why Venezuelans are completely mistaken on what is going to happen in the future. You're going to have the possibility to reach all of those, goods and services, but you have to work your ass off in order to reach those standards of living. Now, what might end up happening, and I'm bullish on this sentiment, is that if you work your ass off, your opportunities are going to increase slightly, maybe a little bit more and a little bit more. And then if you work your ass off with those opportunities, you might create something good, something great. However, there are no guarantees, there are not certainties, only probabilities. But I think it's going to be better. The next 5 years is going to be better than this year. But it's not like going to be, this panacea, this Dubai, Singapore, Norway fantasy, or Venezuelan 1950s, 1980s fantasy. Those years are long gone. So something you have to decide for yourself and analyze for yourself.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.